The wizard's hands trembled as he stared at them in the dim torchlight of his tower. Not from age, though he had lived longer than most mortals could fathom. Not from fear, though he had faced gods and demons alike. These were different hands now, smaller, rougher. The hands of a gnome where once had been the elegant fingers of a human archmage. Bigby flexed them experimentally, watching the play of shadows across unfamiliar skin, and allowed himself a rare smile. New body, new adventures. Some say the multiverse has a sense of irony. The wizard who gave the planes their most famous hand spells now possessed entirely different hands. But then, Bigby's entire existence had been defined by transformation. From evil to good, from servant to master, from human to gnome, from nobody to legend. In approximately the year 534 of the Common Year on the world of Oath, in the unremarkable town of Oldridge within the vanished kingdom of Urdi, a child was born to House Crandon. They named him Bigby. The family possessed wealth enough to provide him with magical education, power enough to trace their lineage back through noble blood to ancestors like the Death Knight Sir Osland Naren. But power and privilege do not guarantee virtue. The young Bigby traveled to the wild coast in his youth, seeking adventure and arcane knowledge. But where some find enlightenment, others find corruption. By the time he encountered Mordenkainen in the depths beneath Castle Greyhawk in 1973, Bigby had become what every adventurer dreads, an evil wizard lurking in the darkness, ready to prey upon the unwary. The duel was brief. Mordenkainen, already a formidable archmage, caught Bigby in a charm spell before the younger wizard could mount an effective defense. The magical compulsion settled over Bigby's mind like a veil, transforming enemy into a servant in an instant. But Mordenkainen was no ordinary conqueror. He understood that true loyalty can never be commanded, only earned. For months, perhaps years, the charm held. Bigby served as Mordenkainen's henchman, his considerable magical talents bent to his new master's will. They delved into dungeons together, they battled monsters and rival wizards. They uncovered ancient secrets in forgotten tombs. And through it all, Mordenkainen worked not just to use his charmed servant, but to understand him, to show him a different path. The exact moment of transformation remains lost to history. There was no dramatic revelation, no single instant of conversion. Instead, adventure by adventure, conversation by conversation, Mordenkainen won what his magic could never truly claim: Bigby's genuine loyalty. The evil wizard began to see the futility of his former ways. He witnessed Mordenkainen's dedication to balance rather than domination. He experienced the satisfaction of using power for something beyond personal gain. When Mordenkainen finally released the charm spell, it was with confidence rather than hope. Bigby had changed, from neutral evil to neutral. He had taken his first steps on a journey that would eventually see him numbered among the greatest defenders of the Flanness. The charmed henchman had become a true companion. The enemy had become a friend. But legends whisper of an amusing side effect of this unusual recruitment. For a time, Mordenkainen's allies insisted that all new henchmen's names must rhyme with Bigby. Thus came Zigby the Dwarf, Rigby the Cleric, Sigby Grigby's son the Fighter, and even Nigby, who would serve as Bigby's own apprentice. The cosmos itself seemed to recognize that Bigby represented something new in Mordenkainen's service, a template worth repeating, even if only in name. In 561 CY, Mordenkainen and Bigby founded the Citadel of Eight, bringing together powerful allies to defend Oath from threats both mundane and magical. Bigby had proven himself worthy of such trust. No longer an apprentice, he stood as Mordenkainen's peer in all but raw power. Together with companions like Rigby the Cleric and Urag, they delved into Maur Castle to face the demon Kurzit and its master Eli Tomarast. They descended into the dungeons beneath the Temple of Elemental Evil, confronting cultists and horrors that would have destroyed lesser heroes. By this time, Bigby had begun to develop the magical innovations that would immortalize his name. A wizard of cautious temperament and introverted nature, he possessed little desire to engage in direct physical combat. His pet phrase became notorious among his allies: "I think we should be very careful about what we're about to do." Such caution might have crippled a lesser mage, but Bigby transformed it into genius. If he would not dirty his own hands in battle, then he would create hands of pure force to fight for him. The first experiments were simple: Bigby's Feeling Fingers, a utility spell that allowed a conjured hand to search for secret doors and hidden mechanisms with supernatural sensitivity. Bigby's Interposing Hand came next, a defensive ward that placed a barrier of force between the wizard and his enemies. But as his power grew, so did his ambition. Bigby's Forceful Hand could push opponents away. Bigby's Grasping Hand could seize and hold them. Bigby's Clenched Fist struck with devastating power. And at the pinnacle of his achievement stood Bigby's Crushing Hand, a 9th level spell of such terrible might that it could squeeze the life from giants and dragons alike. Each spell bore the mark of its creator, efficient, reliable, and utterly without need for the wizard to expose himself to direct danger. The spells proliferated. Bigby's Helpful Hand aided in delicate tasks, granting bonuses to complex work. Bigby's Strangling Grip throttled enemies from afar. Bigby's Fantastic Fencers created multiple hands to engage in melee combat. Bigby's Construction Crew, a ritual spell, could assemble entire fortifications. Scholars eventually cataloged more than 24 distinct hand spells bearing Bigby's name, though debates raged about which were original to his research and which were later additions by admirers seeking to honor his legacy. Beyond spellcraft, Bigby compiled his knowledge into written form. His book, The Manual of Powers Beyond Life, became sought after by necromancers and scholars of the arcane alike, though its contents remain mysterious to all but those who have read its pages. He also established a tower in Oldridge, a sanctuary where he could pursue his research in peace and maintain his extensive libraries. In 570 CY came his first truly great test. Word reached the Citadel that Robilar, a powerful warrior, planned to venture beneath Castle Greyhawk to confront the demigod Eus, who had been imprisoned in Zagig's God Trap since 505 CY. Bigby joined Tensor and Neb Retnar in a desperate race to stop what they feared would be a catastrophe. They arrived too late. Eus was already free, his terrible power unleashed upon the world once more. But Robilar's plan had been more subtle than they realized. The demigod's prison had weakened him greatly. Together with Robilar, the three wizards turned their magic upon Eus, seeking to destroy his physical form before he could regain his strength. Bigby's Crushing Hand closed around the Cambion's throat, squeezing with inexorable force. For a moment, victory seemed certain. Then, at the last possible instant, Eus vanished in a flash of diabolic teleportation, escaping to lick his wounds and plot revenge. The near miss haunted Bigby. He had held a god in his grasp and let him slip away. Worse, he had earned the undying hatred of one of Oath's most dangerous beings. Eus would never forget the wizard who nearly crushed the life from him. That enmity would shadow Bigby for decades to come. The following year in 571 CY, the Citadel of Eight transformed into something greater. Mordenkainen founded the Circle of Eight, a new organization with a more ambitious mandate. Where the Citadel had defended against specific threats, the Circle sought to maintain the balance of power across all Oath, ensuring that neither good nor evil could achieve absolute dominance. It was a thankless task, one that would require the Circle to oppose even their natural allies when the balance tipped too far. But Bigby had long since learned that power without purpose was the path he had walked in his youth. Never again. In 573 CY, Bigby's carefully ordered life shattered. The Lich Zane, serving as court wizard to the mad Overking Ivid V of the Great Kingdom, turned his malevolent attention toward Bigby's tower in Oldridge. The exact nature of Zane's schemes remains obscure, lost in layers of intrigue and political manipulation. What matters is the result. Bigby was forced to flee the home he had built, abandoning his tower and the city where he had been born. The loss cut deep. Bigby's cautious nature made him a creature of habit, someone who found comfort in familiar surroundings and established routines. To be driven from his ancestral home by the machinations of a lich was more than an inconvenience. It was a violation, a reminder that even an archmage of the Circle of Eight could be vulnerable to forces beyond his immediate control. He relocated to Scant, the capital of Onwall on the southern coast of the Azure Sea. But Bigby did not arrive as a conquering hero or display his power openly. Instead, he adopted the alias Frasnir and posed as a merchant dealing in rare goods. It was a masterstroke of misdirection. Who would suspect that the nervous trader haggling over exotic spell components was actually one of the most powerful wizards on Oath? As Frasnir of Scant, Bigby built a new life. He cultivated relationships with members of the Iron League, the alliance of free states that included Onwall. He established networks of contacts and informants. He created a new tower, though one less ostentatious than his Old Ridge residence. And all the while he continued his research into force magic, his studies uninterrupted by his change of location and identity. The alias served him well for years, allowing him to move through scant markets and guild halls without attracting the attention that came with being known as Bigby of the Circle of Eight. It was only around the time of the day of the Great Signing, when the Greyhawk Wars finally ground to a halt, that he began to use his true name more openly. By then his position in Scant was secure, his alliances within the Iron League firm. Zane's intrigue had driven him from Old Ridge, but in doing so the Lich had inadvertently strengthened Bigby's position. The wizard who emerged from his years in Scant was more politically savvy, more willing to work through networks of mortal allies, more understanding of the importance of information and influence. The lessons learned during his exile would serve him well in the trials to come. In 581 CY, the entire Circle of Eight ventured to the tomb of Halmader the Cruel, seeking some long-forgotten artifact or bit of arcane knowledge. Bigby traveled with Tensor, Drawmage, Jalarzi Silverian, Nistel, Otaluke, Otto, and Rary, the greatest concentration of magical might the Flyness had ever assembled in one place. What they found instead was a trap of unspeakable horror. The eye and hand of Vecna, most dreaded artifact of the multiverse's most feared lich, awaited them in the darkness. The battle was brief and brutal. Every member of the Circle fell that day, their bodies torn apart by Vecna's terrible power. Even Bigby, with all his protective spells and force constructs, could not withstand the might of those cursed relics. Death took him in the cold darkness of an ancient tomb, far from the towers and libraries he loved. But death for wizards of the Circle's caliber need not be permanent. Mordenkainen had remained in Greyhawk as a safeguard, a wise precaution that now proved vital. When news of the massacre reached him, the archmage mobilized every resource at his command. Clone spells had been prepared years before, bodies grown and stored against such emergencies. One by one, the fallen Circle members awakened in new flesh, their souls transferred from death back to life. Bigby drew breath once more, alive but shaken. He had walked through death's door and emerged on the other side. The experience changed him in subtle ways. His caution, already legendary, deepened into something approaching paranoia. His dedication to magical research intensified. If the Circle could be destroyed even at the height of their power, then greater power still was needed. There could be no room for complacency. The lessons of Halmader's tomb proved their worth in the years that followed. Bigby continued his adventures with the Circle, growing in power and knowledge, his adopted home of Scant becoming a base of operations, though he traveled frequently on Circle business. His personal symbol, an open palm behind a large stylized bumblebee, became known throughout the region. He took on an apprentice named Carabel, a young boy whose parents had been friends of the archmage. For 8 years, Carabel served his master faithfully, learning the intricacies of magic and the importance of careful preparation. But even resurrection and precaution could not protect Bigby from a more insidious threat: the demigod he had nearly killed years before. In 590 CY, agents of Eus infiltrated Scant and launched an assassination attempt against the wizard who had dared to close a crushing hand around their master's throat. The attack came during what should have been a routine evening in Bigby's tower. Carabel was still an apprentice then, present when Eus's assassin struck. The battle was fierce but brief. Bigby's paranoia, his endless preparations, his habit of maintaining active defensive spells, even in his own sanctum, all paid dividends. The assassins fell to force constructs and carefully placed contingency spells. But the message was clear. Eus's hatred had not diminished with time. If anything, it had grown more focused, more patient, and more dangerous. The demigod would continue seeking opportunities for revenge, and Bigby would need to remain vigilant for the rest of his days. The relationship mirrored in some ways Bigby's own apprenticeship under Mordenkainen, though without the dark beginning. When agents of Eus later assaulted Bigby's tower during the period known as the Circle of Five, Carabel stood with his master, proof that Bigby had learned not just how to be a powerful wizard, but how to be a worthy teacher. The Greyhawk Wars ravaged the Flyness, turning kingdom against kingdom in a conflagration of ambition and ancient grudges. Through it all, the Circle of Eight worked tirelessly to contain the damage, to prevent any single power from achieving dominance that might upset the balance forever. When the wars finally ground to a halt, diplomats gathered in the free city of Greyhawk to sign a treaty that would end the bloodshed. It would have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it became a moment of ultimate treachery. In 584 CY, Bigby, Tensor, and Autolucade uncovered a horrible truth. One of their own, the wizard Rary, planned to assassinate the assembled diplomats and reignite the wars. The discovery was accidental, but its implications were catastrophic. Confrontation became inevitable. What followed was a magical battle that shook the foundations of Greyhawk. Rary, prepared and ruthless, struck with overwhelming force. Autolucade fell first, his defensive spells shattered by focused assault. Tensor died moments later, his clone body destroyed before it could be activated. Bigby fought with everything he had, his hands manifesting across the battlefield, grasping, striking, and crushing. But even his legendary spells could not overcome a prepared traitor who knew all of his tricks. Severely wounded, barely clinging to life, Bigby watched as Rary escaped. 2 of the Circle lay dead. The treaty signing descended into chaos, and Bigby could do nothing but survive and bear witness to the greatest betrayal the Circle had ever endured. The aftermath brought changes to the Circle, now reduced to the Circle of 5. Mordenkainen worked tirelessly to restore Tensor and Autolucade through clones, but the damage to trust and confidence ran deeper than any wound. Bigby emerged from the encounter different yet again. His caution had not prevented disaster. His power had not been enough to save his friends. Perhaps, he began to think, caution itself could become a weakness. Perhaps it was time to take more risks. In the years that followed, those who knew Bigby noted the change. He remained thoughtful, still careful in his preparations, but no longer paralyzed by overcaution. When action was needed, he acted. The betrayal had burned away something in him, leaving behind a wizard who understood that perfect safety was an illusion. All you could do was prepare as best you could and then trust in your skills and your allies. He became an enemy of Rary, naturally, but also deepened his opposition to the Scarlet Brotherhood, which had occupied his beloved Scant during the chaos of the Greyhawk Wars. The loss of his adopted home to the same force that had driven him from Oldridge decades earlier felt like a cosmic joke. But Bigby also forged new alliances, particularly with Cobb Darg and Elaine Mystica of Irongate. The gaunt, pale wizard with Auridian features and perpetually nervous demeanor became a more active force in the Flanness, no longer content to hide behind his magical hands. Not all of Bigby's experiences with the Circle were marked by tragedy and betrayal. During Tensor's induction ceremony into the Circle of Eight on Oath, before the darker days to come, there occurred an incident that would be whispered about in wizardly circles for generations. Tensor wore an enchanted item called the Hood of the Weave during his induction, a powerful artifact that would eventually find its way to distant Toril. Following the ceremony, during the celebration that followed, Bigby and Autolucade decided that the occasion called for a prank. They were, after all, wizards of tremendous power and occasionally questionable maturity. The 2 conspirators ensorcelled Tensor's vodka glass with a spell of their own devising. When Tensor took his celebratory drink, the magic activated. His earlobes transformed into sassy miniature pixies that proceeded to make sardonic commentary on everything Tensor said for the rest of the evening. The newly inducted archmage found himself arguing with his own ears, which had developed distinct personalities and sharp wits. But the Hood of the Weave, attuned as it was to magical energies, had other ideas. The artifact's protective enchantments detected the spell and turned it back upon its casters. Bigby and Autolucade suddenly found their own earlobes sprouting pixie wings and developing voices. The 3 great wizards spent the remainder of the evening engaged in 4-way arguments with their own anatomies. The incident revealed something important about the Circle in those days. Despite their awesome power, despite their responsibility for maintaining the balance of an entire world, they remained fundamentally people. They played pranks, they laughed at themselves, they found joy in absurdity. It was a reminder that power need not erase humanity, that wisdom could coexist with whimsy. In later years, when darkness and betrayal had taken their toll, Bigby sometimes remembered that evening and wondered if he and his companions had lost something vital. the ability to laugh at themselves, to find levity in the midst of cosmic responsibility. Perhaps that loss had been as significant as any of the more dramatic tragedies that followed. The Frost Giant's boulder. They saw the giant lynx first. Bigby would remember that detail later, turning it over in his mind with the peculiar clarity that traumatic memories sometimes possess. He and Mordenkainen were exploring together as they had done countless times before when they spotted the massive feline prowling through the snow. Its fur was white as winter, its eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence, and it moved with the confidence of an apex predator. It should have been an ill omen. Giants, after all, often keep such creatures as companions. The Frost Giant appeared moments later, a towering figure of ice-rimed muscle and ancient fury. Bigby began to prepare his spells, hands already moving through the familiar gestures that would summon protective wards and force constructs. But the giant was faster than he looked, or perhaps Bigby was slower than he thought. Age catches all mortals eventually, even those who have cheated death multiple times. The boulder took him in the chest, a well-placed throw that crushed ribs and organs with casual efficiency. Bigby died instantly, his last conscious thought probably a mix of surprise and irritation. After everything he'd survived, after Vecna and Rary and countless dungeon delves, he was killed by a giant's rock. The multiverse, it seemed, did indeed have a sense of irony. What happened next became the subject of much debate and no small amount of skepticism on Bigby's part. According to Mordenkainen, no cleric was available to perform a true resurrection. Only a druid could be found, and druids didn't resurrect. They reincarnated, which meant that Bigby's soul would return, but in a new body chosen by nature itself rather than restored to its original form. Bigby claimed to this day that Mordenkainen couldn't hide his smirk when relating the story. The archmage who had once charmed an evil wizard and turned him into a loyal companion just happened to only have access to reincarnation rather than resurrection. The coincidence seemed suspect, but whether through genuine happenstance or Mordenkainen's particular brand of humor, the spell was cast. Bigby awoke as a gnome. Not a human of average height and gaunt build, but a small, stocky figure with dark brown hair and eyes. His centuries of magical knowledge remained intact. His personality, his memories, his very soul was unchanged. But the body was entirely new. The hands that had inspired a dozen famous spells were different hands now. Smaller, different proportions. The very weapons he had relied upon for his entire career had been transformed. Mordenkainen suggested more than once that Bigby might want to transfer his spellbook to a more appropriately sized volume. Bigby refused to give him the satisfaction. If this was indeed the Archmage's idea of a joke, then Bigby would demonstrate the new body or not, he remained exactly who he had always been. The spellbook stayed the same size. The hands simply learned to work with pages meant for larger fingers. But as the initial shock faded, Bigby found himself intrigued by his transformation. He was curious about experiencing the multiverse from a gnome's perspective. The change forced him to see the world differently, both literally and figuratively. His cautious nature found new expression as he adapted to a body that was smaller, more vulnerable, and yet possessed of its own strengths and advantages. Some sources suggest this transformation occurred around 576 CY, though the exact timing remains murky in official records. His first encounter with giants in his new form took him to the dungeons beneath the steading of the Hill Giant Chief. There in a cell that should have held him prisoner, Bigby found instead a divine trickster. Dian Castra, daughter of the giant god Anum the Allfather, looked up at the gnome wizard with eyes that sparkled with mischief and ancient wisdom. Bigby initially mistook her for a simple prisoner, perhaps another captive of the hill giants who ruled the steading. Only later did he learn her true nature as a demigoddess of giants. But even that first meeting sparked something. Dian Castra saw in this transformed wizard a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to be changed, to be different from what others expected. To thank him for the rescue, she taught Bigby the rudiments of rune carving, the ancient giant magic that predated human wizardry by countless ages. The glowing symbols held power of a different sort than the arcane formulas Bigby has studied his entire life. They were primal, direct, connected to the fundamental forces of creation in ways that even his force hands could not match. When they met again, it was to put an end to a cult of elemental evil that threatened both their peoples. The partnership came naturally. Diancastra's divine strength and Bigby's arcane mastery complemented each other perfectly. But more than that, they enjoyed each other's company. The cautious, introverted wizard and the bold trickster demigoddess formed an unlikely friendship. As Bigby's thoughts turned towards legacy, towards creating something that would endure beyond his lifetime, he sought out Diancastra's aid. He wanted to forge an item of great power, something that would serve as a testament to his skill and a tool for good in the multiverse. Diancastra knew just the place, the Star Forge. She led him to a small obsidian island in a lake formed in a massive crater. Ages ago, a star had fallen from the heavens, devastating the surrounding land with its impact. Giants of a vanished empire had found the fallen star and built a forge around it, channeling its cosmic power into their crafts. The forge had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for someone worthy to use it again. There, working together over days and weeks, Bigby and Diancastra forged Bigby's beneficent bracelet. The magical item combined gnomish craftsmanship with giant runecraft and the cosmic power of a fallen star. 4 gold rings attached via delicate chains to a wrist cuff studded with sapphires and diamonds. It represented not just magical power, but the friendship between 2 unlikely allies. Their work at the forge cemented a bond that would last for years to come. Afterward, Diancastra delighted in showing Bigby the glory of the giants across the breadth of the multiverse. She took him to see storm giants commanding the weather from their cloud castles. She showed him fire giants working forges that put even dwarven smithies to shame. She introduced him to frost giant jarls who ruled frozen kingdoms with iron will. She revealed the intricate social structure of the Ordning, the divine hierarchy that governed giant society. Bigby, who had spent most of his life fighting giants or treating them as obstacles to be overcome, began to see them differently. They were not just monsters to be defeated, but a people with rich culture, ancient traditions, and their own forms of greatness. His notes and observations from this period would eventually form the basis of a book that would change how wizards across the multiverse understood giant kind. The physical form. As a human, Bigby had stood 5 feet and 11 inches tall, with a gaunt, almost skeletal frame that reflected his aesthetic lifestyle and disdain for physical pleasures. He weighed barely 149 pounds, his pale skin stretched over bones with little muscle or fat to soften his appearance. Light brown hair framed Iridian features, and dark brown eyes stared out with perpetual wariness. He looked like what he was, a scholar wizard who had devoted his life to arcane study at the expense of all else. In his gnomish form, Bigby retained his dark brown hair and eyes, but now wore his hair in an undercut on the sides and back, with the top pulled back into intricate looping braids. He was of average build for a gnome, neither particularly robust nor frail. The transformation had granted him a new perspective quite literally, as he now saw the world from a much lower vantage point. His personality, however, remained unchanged by the transformation. Quiet, introverted, and soft-spoken, Bigby continued to appear perpetually nervous and overcautious about everything. His pet phrase, "I think we should be very careful about what we're about to do," became something of a running joke among his allies. But those who knew him well understood that his caution was not cowardice. It was the wisdom of someone who had seen how quickly confidence could turn to catastrophe. His puritanical and ascetic nature persisted. Where other wizards might indulge in fine wines, sumptuous feasts, or romantic entanglements, Bigby eschewed pleasures of the flesh entirely. Some speculated this was a reaction to his evil past, an overcorrection meant to keep him from sliding back into selfish indulgence. Others thought it simply reflected his personality, a man and later a gnome who found more satisfaction in perfect spell formulas than any physical comfort. Yet after Rary's betrayal and his own death in Reincarnation, something shifted. He remained thoughtful and conservative in temperament, but the paralyzing overcaution began to fade. He took more risks, engaged more directly with threats to the balance. The wizard who had once hidden behind force construct learned to trust in his ability to adapt when preparations proved insufficient. His new body became a metaphor for his transformation. Different, unexpected, but ultimately just another challenge to overcome through wit and will. By the time Bigby reached his late 50s in his human form, or whatever age counted as equivalent in his gnome body, his spells had spread across the multiverse. The irony was not lost on him. A wizard who had started as an evil NPC, who had been charmed into service and slowly redeemed, had given the plane some of the most recognizable and widely used magical formulas. His hand spells became so ubiquitous that wizards who had never heard of Oath or the Circle of Eight still learned Bigby's interposing hand or Bigby's grasping hand as part of their fundamental education. When the great wizard Kelvin Blackstaff of Waterdeep sought to counter these famous spells, he developed Kelvin's Warding Whip specifically to disrupt and destroy Bigby's force constructs. It was a testament to how seriously other archmages took Bigby's innovations that they felt the need to develop specific countermeasures. In later magical traditions, the numerous hand spells were consolidated into a single versatile casting, Bigby's Hand. The spell allowed a wizard to choose which manifestation they needed in the moment: Clenched Fist for striking enemies, Forceful Hand for pushing them away, Grasping Hand for seizing and holding, Interposing Hand for defense, all from a single spell formula adapted at the caster's whim. It was efficient, elegant, and thoroughly in keeping with Bigby's practical approach to magic. His fame spread beyond Oath. On Toril, the world of the Forgotten Realms, the wizards recognized his spells and spoke his name with respect. In 1358 DR, when Midnight gained much of Mystra's divine power during the Time of Troubles, she immediately recognized a spell she witnessed as one of Bigby's inventions, created many centuries before. In 1364 DR, when Rovelard and Harkle Harpel engaged in a spellcasting competition, the question, "Do you know of Bigby?" was answered with recognition of one of the most magnificent wizards of all time, even on other worlds. His influence extended into popular culture beyond the practice of magic. The Jones Soda Company released a limited edition D&D soda set that included Bigby's Crushing Thirst Destroyer. Statues bearing his likeness appeared in the planar city of Sigil. His name became shorthand for innovation in force magic, a benchmark against which other wizards measured their own accomplishments. But perhaps his most lasting legacy came in the form of knowledge shared. After his adventures with Dian Castra, after witnessing the glory of giant culture across the multiverse, Bigby compiled his observations into a comprehensive work. Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants became essential reading for anyone seeking to understand giant kind beyond simplistic stereotypes. The book revealed the complexities of the Ordning, the sophisticated magic of giant runes, the rich traditions of different giant clans. Throughout the book, Bigby's characteristic voice came through in marginal notes and observations. Sometimes cautious, sometimes wry, always thoughtful, his commentary reflecting both his own transformation and his genuine respect for the giants he had once fought without understanding. Dian Castra added her own notes, creating a dialogue between divine trickster and transformed wizard that illuminated giant culture from multiple perspectives. In the quiet moments between adventures, when Bigby sat in his tower, whether in his current residence in Mitric, Valuna, or wherever his travels had taken him, with his oversized spellbook spread before his small gnomish hands, he sometimes reflected on the path that had brought him to this point. From evil to neutral to something approaching good. From charmed servant to trusted ally. From human to gnome. From nobody to legend. Each transformation had been forced on him by circumstance. The charm spell had compelled his initial change from enemy to servant. Zane's intrigue had driven him from Oldridge. Death in Halmadar's tomb and resurrection through clone magic had taught him the impermanence of physical existence. Rary's betrayal had broken through his overcautious shell. The Frost Giant's boulder and subsequent reincarnation had given him an entirely new body and perspective. Yet looking back, he could see how each change had been necessary. Without Mordenkainen's charm, he would have remained an evil wizard, probably dying in some forgotten dungeon without ever realizing his potential. Without being driven from Oldridge, he would have never learned to build networks of mortal allies or to work through aliases and indirection. Without experience in death and resurrection, he would never have understood the value of every moment, the importance of action over endless preparation. Without Rary's lesson in betrayal, he might never have moved beyond his paralyzing caution. Without his gnomish reincarnation, he would have never met Dian Castra, or come to apprentice the giants he had once dismissed as mere obstacles. The multiverse had a way of forcing growth upon those who lived long enough and paid attention. Bigby had paid attention. He had learned from his defeats as well as his victories. He had adapted when circumstances demanded it. He had transformed not just his body multiple times, but his very nature, slowly and painfully becoming something better than he had been. And he was still transforming. His friendship with Dian Castra continued to open new perspectives. His ongoing research into force magic pushed the boundaries of what was possible. His work with the Circle of Eight, now restored to his full complement after much effort, kept him engaged with the great struggles of the age. He was, at his core, still the same Bigby who had once fought Mordenkainen in the depths beneath Castle Greyhawk. But he was also entirely different, shaped by centuries of experience into something his younger self could never have imagined. His hands, both the physical hands he now possessed and the magical hands he conjured through his spells, represented this journey. They had been weapons when he was evil, tools when he was cautious, and had become something more nuanced now. Instruments of balance, capable of gentleness or violence as the situation demanded. Just as his own nature had evolved from simple evil to complex neutrality to something approaching wisdom. Enemies and allies. A wizard's enemies tell the story of his values. Bigby's opposition to Rary needed no explanation. The traitor had killed his friends and attempted to destroy the very balance the circle worked to maintain. But his other enemies revealed more subtle aspects of his character. The Scarlet Brotherhood earned his enmity by occupying Scant, the city he had adopted as his home. Their philosophy of racial purity and Sul supremacy represented everything Bigby had learned to oppose. They sought to impose order through domination rather than balance, to elevate one people by grinding others beneath their heel. That he had himself come from a noble heredity house, and he had claimed the privilege based on bloodline, made his opposition to their ideology all the more pointed. The Lich Zane represented a different kind of threat. Ancient, terrible, and utterly devoted to undeath, Zane made other liches seem tame by comparison. The exact circumstances of their enmity stemmed from the intrigue that had driven Bigby from Oldridge in 573 CY. Zane, serving as the court wizard to the mad Overking Ivid V, had schemed against Bigby for reasons that remained obscure. The forced exile had turned professional rivalry into personal hatred. Eaz's enmity was more straightforward but no less dangerous. The demigod greatly hated Bigby for nearly crushing the life from him in 570 CY. That hatred manifested in assassination attempts, schemes against the Circle, and a patience born of near immortality. Eaz would wait decades or centuries for the perfect moment to strike. Bigby knew this and planned accordingly, his paranoia in this case entirely justified. His allies, by contrast, showed his capacity for connection despite his introverted nature. Mordenkainen remained his oldest and most complicated ally. The relationship had evolved from master-servant to genuine friendship, though it retained an element of the old dynamic. Mordenkainen still played tricks, still pushed Bigby beyond his comfort zone, still refused to let him retreat into pure scholarship. The Reincarnation incident, whether truly necessary or not, exemplified this pattern. But beneath the needling and the jests lay genuine respect and affection forged over centuries of shared struggle. His partnership with Dian Castra brought something different, a friendship based on mutual transformation and understanding. She was divine but approachable, powerful but playful, serious about preserving giant culture but willing to teach its secrets to a gnome wizard who had once fought her people without understanding them. Their collaboration on Bigby's beneficent bracelet symbolized a bridge between different worlds, different perspectives, and different kinds of power. Cobb Darg and Elaine Mystica of Irongate provided more conventional allies, fellow defenders of the Flaness who shared his commitment to balance and order. These relationships lacked the deep history of his bond with Mordenkainen or the divine dimension of his friendship with Dian Castra, but they represented something equally important. Proof that the former evil wizard had learned to work with others as equals, not merely as master and servant or rivals forced into alliance. His apprentice Carabel showed yet another facet of Bigby's character. Taking on a student meant accepting responsibility for shaping another life, for passing on not just magical knowledge but also values and perspective. That Bigby chose to teach, to mentor, and to guide rather than simply accumulate power for himself demonstrated how far he had traveled from his evil origins. The boy who came to him after his parents' death found not a cold, distant master, but someone who understood what it meant to be transformed by mentorship. The philosophy of hands. Scholars who studied Bigby's work often focused on the mechanical aspects of his spells. The force calculations, the duration formulas, the scaling factors that allowed his constructs to grow more powerful with increased magical investment. But those who looked deeper saw philosophy encoded in his choice of magical expression. Hands were, fundamentally, tools of interaction. They could grasp or release, strike or caress, push away or pull close, defend or attack. By choosing hands as his primary magical signature, Bigby revealed his understanding that power was meaningless without purpose, that magic existed to accomplish specific goals rather than merely demonstrate might. His original motivation had been simple. He didn't want to dirty his own hands in combat, but as his understanding deepened, the hands became something more. They were expressions of will at a distance, manifestations of intention made physical. When Bigby cast Interposing Hand, he wasn't just creating a shield, he was placing his will between himself and harm, actively choosing defense over offense. When he summoned Crushing Hand, he wasn't merely dealing damage. He was making a decision about who deserved to be destroyed, exerting control over life and death. The versatility of hands made them perfect instruments for a wizard dedicated to balance. The same basic magical construct could be adapted for dozens of purposes, searching for secret doors with feeling fingers, assisting with delicate tasks through helpful hand, engaging in combat with fantastic fencers, or even constructing fortifications with construction crew. Where other wizards specialized in destruction or healing or control, Bigby's hands could do all of these things and more. There was also an element of identity in his choice. Hands were personal and unique. Every person's hands carried their own story in scars and calluses, in the way fingers moved and gestures expressed meaning. By creating magical hands that moved at his command, mimicking his own gestures, Bigby extended his personal touch across the battlefield. The hands were undeniably his in a way that a fireball or lightning bolt never could be. His transformation to a gnome added new layers to this philosophy. His new hands were different in size and proportion, yet his spells remained the same. The hands he conjured through magic bore no relation to physical hands that cast them. This disconnect illustrated a deeper truth. The physical form was temporary and mutable, but the will that shaped magic remained constant. Bigby's hands were not really about hands at all. They were about intention, purpose, and the projection of self into the world. When younger wizards asked why he focused so exclusively on force constructs shaped like hands, Bigby's answer was characteristically practical. They work. But in private moments, he might have admitted a deeper truth. The hands reminded him of his own transformation. Just as he'd been changed by the touch of others, Mordenkainen's charm, the circle's friendship, Dian Castra's teaching, so too did his hands change the world around him. For better or worse, they left their mark. In the current era, Bigby could often be found in Mitric, capital of Valuna, when he wasn't traveling the plains with Dian Castra or attending to circle business. His home in Scant remained occupied by the Scarlet Brotherhood, a situation that gnawed at him but which required patience to address. The balance demanded it. Liberating one city through overwhelming magical force might create imbalances elsewhere, trigger reactions that would do more harm than good. Still, he planned. Bigby had learned patience over his long life, but he had also learned that patience was not the same as inaction. When the time came, when the balance permitted it, the Scarlet Brotherhood would learn what it meant to occupy the home of a gnome wizard with a reputation for careful preparation and devastating execution. His research continued unabated. Force magic remained his primary focus, but his studies with Dian Castra had opened new avenues. Giant rune magic offered possibilities that traditional human wizardry couldn't match. He experimented with combining the two traditions, seeking to create hybrid spells that drew on both arcane formulas and primal symbols. Some experiments failed spectacularly. Others showed promise. All of them pushed the boundaries of what magic could accomplish. His book on giants had brought him recognition beyond the circles of professional wizards. Adventurers preparing to face giant kind sought out his insights. Scholars studying planar creatures referenced his observations. Even some giants themselves acknowledged the respect and understanding he had shown their people, a remarkable achievement for someone who had spent much of his early career fighting them. The Circle of Eight had been restored to its full strength, though the scars of Rary's betrayal remained. Trust, once broken, could be repaired but never fully restored to its original state. The Circle members watched each other more carefully now, communicated more openly, prepared contingencies against internal threats as well as external ones. It was a sadder, wiser circle than the one that had existed before the betrayal, but perhaps also a stronger one. Bigby himself embodied this evolution, no longer the overcautious wizard who hesitated at every decision, but also not the reckless risk-taker who ignored danger. He'd found a middle path between paralysis and recklessness, between absolute safety and absolute vulnerability. When situations demanded action, he acted. When they required patience, he waited. The key was knowing which approach fit which circumstance. His gnomish body had become comfortable to him after years of adaptation. He no longer thought of it as a new form or a temporary state. It was simply who he was now. The wizard Bigby, archmage of the Circle of Eight, master of force magic, friend to a giant demigoddess, former evil wizard redeemed through patience and mentorship, killed by a frost giant's boulder and reborn in a form that opened new perspectives and possibilities. Sometimes, in the depths of night, when sleep eluded him, he wondered what his younger self would think of what he'd become. Would that evil wizard lurking in the dungeons beneath Castle Greyhawk recognize the cautious gnome studying giant runes and crafting benevolent magical items? Would he be horrified by the transformation or intrigued by the power achieved through it? The question was ultimately meaningless. That young wizard was dead, killed not by any enemy but by time and experience and the patient work of Mordenkainen's mentorship. What remained was Bigby as he currently existed. Flawed, careful, powerful, wise in some ways and still learning in others. A work in progress even after centuries, still transforming and still growing. Still reaching out with magical hands to touch the world and try to make it better, one spell at a time. The hands that shape the world. The gnome wizard sat in his study, his small hands moving through the complex gestures required to summon a force construct. The hand materialized in the air before him, translucent and shimmering with magical energy. Large, powerful, and capable of crushing boulders or gently retrieving a fallen book. He studied it critically, looking for imperfection in the weave, weaknesses in the structure. Perfect, as always. Bigby's interposing hand, 9th iteration, improved over the original formula through centuries of refinement. He dismissed it with a gesture and sat back, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. Outside his tower window, the world continued its eternal dance of conflict and cooperation, destruction and creation, chaos and order. The balance remained precarious as it always had been, as it always would be. The Circle of Eight would continue their work, opposing threats from all sides, making the hard choices that others couldn't or wouldn't make. And Bigby would be there, hands ready to grasp or strike or defend as needed. No longer evil, no longer paralyzed by caution. No longer entirely human, but still himself in all the ways that mattered. Still the wizard who had learned that transformation was not weakness but strength. The change was not death but opportunity, and that hands could build as well as destroy. He turned back to his research, his gnome-sized spellbook. He had finally given in and transcribed everything, though he would never admit this to Mordenkainen, and lost himself in the familiar comfort of magical formulas and arcane theories. Somewhere out in the multiverse, Diane Castro was probably getting into trouble that would require his help. The Scarlet Brotherhood continued to occupy Scant, a problem demanding a solution. Rary plotted in his desert exile, nursing grudges and planning revenge. Ayaz watched and waited, his patience measured in centuries, his hatred undiminished. Let them come. Let the world continue to spin. Bigby had hands, both physical and magical, and he knew how to use them. The archmage who had started as an evil NPC in a dungeon had become a legend whose spells echoed across the multiverse. Not bad for someone who'd been charmed into redemption and reincarnated by accident, or design. New body, new adventures, he thought, smiling to himself. And maybe that's exactly what the multiverse needs. Someone who knows that the hands that hold power can choose what they grasp, what they release, what they protect, and what they destroy. Someone who has learned through painful experience that the greatest magic is not in the spells themselves, but in the wisdom to know when and how to use them. Outside, a storm was gathering. Inside, Bigby prepared, as he always had, as he always would. The hands that shaped the world were ready for whatever came next.